Donald Trump has vowed to fully exploit Venezuela's oil reserves, the largest in the world. To do so, he's seeking $100 billion in investment. But after a meeting with oil executives at the White House Friday, none made any promises, with the head of Exxon even calling the country uninvestable. Well, for some insight, we can speak to Francis Perrin, a senior research fellow at French think tank IRIS, who's specialized in energy issues. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you very much.
Now, oil executives, as I mentioned, seemed far from enthusiastic at that meeting this week. Why is that?
In order to invest billions of dollars or dozens of billions of dollars in any country, as seen from the oil business, you have to meet three criteria: security, long-term stability, and profitability. If one of these criteria is not met, oil companies will not invest, whether US companies or non-US companies. And as far as the state of Venezuela is concerned, of course, it's a little difficult. So there is no great enthusiasm for this perspective. Security, Donald Trump said, you will have total security. It's a promise. As you said just a few minutes ago, the US federal government is urging Americans to leave Venezuela now. So there is, of course, a security problem. Stability, not for the year ahead, 2026, but for many years ahead, because when you invest in the oil industry, you invest at least billions of dollars with a time span of 10, 20, 30 or more years. And it's, of course, very difficult for the oil men to say, well, Venezuela will be a stable country for the decades ahead. And profitability, as ExxonMobil chairman Darren Woods said to Trump a few days ago, the oil law of Venezuela must be changed. The contracts must be changed in order for us to expect the minimum rentability, profitability we need in order to invest billions and billions of dollars. So far, conditions are not yet, but you do not say no to Donald Trump. So ExxonMobil said, we are ready to send the technical mission on the ground in order to assess the state of Venezuela oil infrastructure facilities in order to see what we are going to do. But so far, it's not the time to invest billions of dollars, not yet.
Yeah, security and long-term stability are two big question marks. Perhaps we can talk more about the question of profitability. Venezuela currently produces about 1 million barrels a day, I believe, less than 1% of the global supply. How many barrels a day would it have to produce to be considered profitable?
It's not only a question of volume. You can have a profitable business with a small oil production, a mid-sized oil production, or a very large oil production. It depends on contracts. And first, the hydrocarbon law or laws in the country, and the contracts you would sign with Venezuelan authorities. You said rightly that Venezuela oil production is now between 900,000 barrels per day and 1 million barrels per day of oil. About 25 years ago, the same country produced more than 3 million barrels per day. It would be possible, in terms of resources, to go back to such a volume, not, of course, in 2026, in many years from now, perhaps 10 to 15 years. And before that, it would be possible to double the current oil production of Venezuela, so to reach a level of about 2 million barrels per day in perhaps at the beginning of the next decade. But with dozens of billions of investment. And of course, PDVSA, the state oil company of Venezuela, is not able to do this, financially speaking. It would mean huge investments by US companies, non-US companies, probably European companies, because of course the Trump administration is not ready to see Chinese and Russian companies to come to Venezuela and to invest billions of dollars in oil facilities. So profitability is almost dependent on hydrocarbons laws in the country and contracts, not on the level of production.
Can you tell us a bit more about Venezuela's oil reserves? What kind of oil is it, and how does that impact the question of exploiting it?
It's what oilmen call extra heavy oil. You have, in fact, different qualities of oil in the world: light, medium, heavy, extra heavy. And extra heavy oil is not a very good oil. Contrary to what President Trump is saying, it's not a very good oil. It's more difficult and more expensive to produce. It's difficult to transport. It's difficult to refine. And as it is not high quality crude, when you sell it on world markets, you have a price which is lower than when you sell conventional oil, for instance, Brent or West Texas Intermediate, to quote some of the major reference crude in the world. So you have less margin because it's costly to produce, and you have less dollars when you sell it on world markets. It means that really contracts must be very interesting in order to push oil companies, US or non-US, to invest billions of dollars which are required in this country. It's not mission impossible, but it's mission very difficult.
Given how complicated and expensive it would be then to really be exploiting Venezuela's oil reserves, is that really one of the motivations? Why then did the U.S. try to take control of them?
Behind the US control of oil, and we have in mind that a few days only after the military action on January 3, the US is now in total control of Venezuelan oil exports, whether crude oil or refined products, in only a few days. Why? In fact, the US does not really need oil from Venezuela because the US is the leading oil producer in the world, before Saudi Arabia and Russia. And of course, they produce a lot, much than Venezuela, about almost 20 times the Venezuela production of oil. But they need to control this oil, because if you control oil from Venezuela, the US, it means that it will not be controlled by other countries which are not your best friends, mainly China. As Marco Rubio said, we no longer want that countries which are not part of the Western Hemisphere, the American continent, and which are not our best friends, control strategic resources in an American country. This means, of course, Venezuelan oil. So it's not to take the oil for the US, it's to prevent others, including China, especially China, to control oil in Venezuela in the Western Hemisphere, as often said in Washington.
What impact then is the U.S.'s control going to have in China, which is Venezuela's biggest buyer of oil currently?
Yes. China is by far the biggest importer of Venezuelan oil. It is also by far the biggest buyer of Iranian oil, and it's by far the biggest buyer of Chinese oil. And Venezuela, Iran, and Russia are sanctioned by the US government with oil sanctions. Of course, much more sanctions on Iran and Venezuela than on Russia, because of the friend of Trump, Mr. Putin, in the Kremlin. But you have, over the past few months, the beginning of US sanctions on oil in Russia. It's not, of course, something which is totally surprising when Washington is sanctioning three countries whose main outlet for oil is China, the main strategic enemy of the US in this century.
And is that going to have a big impact on China and their access to oil?
Chinese rulers are very worried, astonished about what happened in Venezuela. And they clearly see the aim of this strategy by the US. It's China. Of course, the main target is Venezuela. You have some other targets, Cuba, for instance, which imports oil from Venezuela at very, very low prices. You have also the relationship between Caracas and Tehran, between Caracas and the Hezbollah, but also the relationship between Venezuela and China. And it's, of course, mainly an oil relationship.
All right, Francis Perrin, thank you again so much for bringing us your insight this morning. That was Francis Perrin, a senior research fellow at French think tank IRIS, who is specialized in energy issues.